Everyone, Sean Maloney, Digital Business Masters. Hope you're well. We had a great summer. Back now with a bang. Got lots and lots of things to update on. Always been things going on, even over quieter periods. We know August and September tend to be quieter in the market for obvious reasons, but we need to prepare. We need to make sure everything's in line, and that means we never stop. We never actually stop. There's no holidays in the sense in this industry. You are running a self-employed business, therefore you're constantly on. Okay, the fact that you've got more flexibility and time and freedom to do whatever you want when you want, that's the payoff, right? But you're never really off. So don't think this is a job. It's not. You're in the full responsibility at all times. And the job of DBM Academy is to try and just help you stay the course and keep you corralled into a roadmap and a blueprint so that you get to where you need to be rather than getting lost in the forest. So two parts here. Part one is all about the big information we offer every single week with regards to macroeconomics and geopolitics. Remember, you are working closest to the money supply. So therefore you must be aware at least of really what's going on behind the scenes with the Fed Reserve, central banks, government, policymakers, fiscal and monetary policy, etc. So we summarize that. And then part two, having all that information is great, but if you don't know how to put anything into actual real action, then you're just a perpetual student. So the whole idea would be for us to then convert knowledge into actual action, which is what we do at DBM as well, because there's no point just being informed. On that, we're not here to give any advice, certainly not financial advice. That's not our job. We don't want to be financial advisors. If you want a financial advisor, go transport yourself back to 1985. They're still talking the same way to people as they were then. These days, we're looking at much more sophisticated fiscal and financial technology, and the key is to make sure that you are availed of that. Okay, just mute your mics, guys. So the whole idea is for us to take a sense check on what's going on in the fiat world and then transpose that across to the digital world. Okay, that's the whole idea, and this is very, very important because you haven't noticed, to perpetually operate in the fiat system means you're losing between 8 and 10% per year in purchasing power. People wake up every day scratching their heads wondering why. What they think is prices going up. It's got nothing to do with prices going up. It's got everything to do with the purchasing power of your dollars, pounds, and euros going down. Once you understand that, you'll be in a much better place. How do we know that's true? Well, because for decades we've observed this infographic and we've known about earning income. Your teachers, your parents, your bosses, the banks, they'll encourage you, the governments, they'll encourage you to get a certain qualification, to get out there and then convert skill and effort and energy into currency. That's what they tell you to do. And then people are daft enough to continually do that decade after decade after decade, chasing monthly. A lot of people live month to month. I mean, it's extraordinary. And they're doing that because they have a perception that they want a certain lifestyle. So they'll go and convert currency for liabilities. They can't understand why the liabilities are continually going up in perceived price. And they certainly can't understand why they're putting probably more effort in than they've ever done before, even into the 40s and 50s. And they're still treading water. They just can't understand. Now, why? Well, because they're not thinking or operating in ways that provide them with strength. They're not educating themselves. They're just going with the flow, hoping something turns out. Yeah? The bottom part of this infographic is the polar opposite. We are informed, we are educated, we are on our toes. We are not happy with anything that we're told by bosses, banks, and governments. We'll listen to what they say. We'll talk about a lot of that in a minute. But we're certainly not going to be reliant on it. We're going to be contrarian. We're going to look at other things. We're going to do what the wealthy do. And that involves converting, devaluing fiat currency into appreciating and accretive assets. And then you convert a proportion of that accretive asset, in other words, a price discovery, a increase in price, which ironically happens mainly because they continue to print currency. So as long as you own assets, you're able to gain equity. And then the skill is converting proportions of the equity into cash flow and using that to fund liabilities. It's so obvious it's not funny. How many people in your circles, your family, your friends, your wider community don't understand anything I've just said? Think about it. Don't be that person. Get ahead. Great. Well, how do we do that? Well, we build on 3 churches. And they're designed to provide us with 2 major directives: equity and yield. So we'll use sound money, absolute energy, which comes in the form of what's called Bitcoin. Yeah, other things as well, gold, for example, and increasingly some altcoins, where we're able to see perpetual price discovery because of a very simple thing called supply and demand. And when you wrap around that something called stock to flow, then you're able to achieve the ownership of perpetual equity. And once you've got equity, in other words, something is worth more today than it was the day you acquired it, then you're able to then convert some of the equity into what's called yield. And traditionally, people have just relied on banks to do that for them in the form of what are called interest rates. But many decades ago, it became impossible for people to really achieve yield because the banks are part of the system that prints more currency, that devalues the purchasing power. And if your purchasing power is being devalued by 8 to 10% a year, yet you're being perceivedly being provided 2% if you're good, more like 0.5% a year in yield from your savings account, then how are you supposed to protect purchasing power? And it's even worse in pensions and annuities and insurance policies, because they're gestating for decades and people conveniently just leave them under the carpet. Oh, it'll be okay. I trust the government. It's okay. I trust the banks. They'll look after me. Yeah, they are looking after you by taking big slugs of growth over every single week of that 40 years. They take their fees, no problem. What you're left with at the end of that cycle is the problem. So you need to work in it in the moment, in the day, in the hour. Don't burn daylight. Be conscious and cognitive of every single asset that you're in control of. And that's where the yields come in through smart contracts. If you're really good and persistent and have the ability to stay the course, you can get involved with altcoin projects which combine equity and yield together. Very few people have the staying power for that. And that's okay. At the very least, dollar cost average Bitcoin, and own more Bitcoin next month than you do this month. I used to say over many, many years, own one Bitcoin. Now, as we talk about in part 2 of this call, you'll see that the reality is just owning 0.1 Bitcoin can go a long way to protecting your purchasing power for decades to come. Okay, so it's very simple, 3 churches. Because obviously, explaining it's one thing and hearing it is another. In the event, when it comes to what it takes, especially in an industry where predominantly you're working on your own on a laptop, you need help, you need support, you need community. So about 5 years ago, which is an eons of time in this space, most coaches and fly-by-night YouTubers and 2-bit wannabes, they last months in this industry because they just haven't got what it takes. They think they can teach people, but they really can't. We've seen it, done it, got the t-shirt. But we've worked really hard over 5 years, in fact longer. We've been in this 15 years, but we decided to set up a professional academy structure about 5 years ago, which is a long time in this space, because we recognise that people are great for starting. They'll turn up to the gym on January the 1st, no problem, but they won't still be at the gym by 1st of June because they can't be bothered, right? Or they find it's too hard, or they get shooting off to some other shiny object. So we determined, and it's not easy, because you take a lot of heat when things don't go perfectly, right? Everybody wants an easy ride. But the whole idea is for those who are good, those who are serious, those who do want to make a difference in their lives based on everything I've said, will always win. Always. Everybody who bought Bitcoin in 2020 is in profit. Everybody who sustains through projects, through longevity, always wins. Yeah? In the moment, it's not easy. In the moment, you'll find lots of reasons to give up. You really will. But with the combined effort amongst the community, you will win. You always do. Yeah? So the structure is very, very important. So this is great. Choose where you want to be. Okay? And then we've also realized more recently that there are a lot of people in the established community, and there's a lot of people in the outside world who are realizing, especially since we've had a change of administration over in the US, that everything I've been talking about for the past 10 minutes, something has to give. So there's a lot of outside people, as we call them, lots of people who aren't already part of the DBM community, who are looking for guidance, looking for assistance. Now, as professional and as hardworking as the DBM coaching team are, it is literally impossible to create enough hours in the day to look after more than a smallish number of people. So what do? Well, we bring in the technology. So for the first time in DBM Academy, for the skills level above, if your systems and income you're already in, you looked after your grandfather, no problem at all. But if you for skills, which is $25 a month now, either you upgrade or you come in as skills, then you'll get access to the Wealth Builder series. Now, this is very AI orientated, okay? Something that is phenomenal if you think about it, because we're able to put out into the world all the basic steps that are required. Yeah, there's about 12 steps in all, which correlates with 12 months of the year. And it starts with the mindset and the skills, then moves into systems, then income, and then we'll show you how to manage income and maintain income all over a 12-month period, right? So this thing has been developed. It actually went live on the 1st of September, and it's a very, very powerful means for you to go through in your own time. This is another thing that people may struggle with, that in an academy environment when it's all live, you have to keep up with everything, right? So what a lot of people say to us is, well, can we just go through a process and tick it off in our own time? Of course you can. That's what this is for. That's what the Wealth Builder series is for. As you get more sophisticated and you get some wind in your air balloon, you'll find you want to be more and more and more close to the action, which is what the DBM Hub and the DBM workspaces are at the higher subscription levels. But this gets you going. All right. So make sure you get registered. Make sure you get started. It started now. It's literally started the 1st of September. And it'll be a monthly step-by-step process. It might feel slow, but it isn't, because you need time to do the module activities. Yeah. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to be ready for the next module. And you'll give up trying, just like going to a gym. Right. So this is now live. We're very proud of it. Month 1 is in the bag. Click the links below and you'll be able to either register and enroll or get started. And we look forward to seeing you. Please, any feedback you've got, we would really welcome it much, if you don't mind. Now, into the backbone of what this session is all about in the event. Let's get down to the detail, because everything I've said is great. And, learning how to set up a digital business and maintain and manage a digital business is great. But you need fire in your lungs, right? You need really to be really, really clear on what it is that's happening in the world on the financial and monetary levels, okay? And this isn't about getting rich or wealthy or anything like that. It's just protecting yourself and your family. And if you're really good, you might get to a point where you expand life opportunity. You may be able to get to do things that you've always wanted to do, as opposed to putting everything off every year because smashing the jar. Now, if you understand this slide, you'll appreciate how we've done it. So we're not just talking about doing it, we've done it. That's why we're so passionate about it. So how did we do it? Well, because we spotted the problem over a decade ago. Thankfully, 2008 happened. It didn't feel very good at the time. But looking back, all those years, it was a blessing, absolute blessing, because it shook us up. And it basically all started back here, where we were able to say, okay, well, we may not have understood it fully back here, not as much as we do today, but we certainly had a feeling that we needed to protect ourselves from bosses, banks, and governments. And that's exactly what we did. Now, to get from 2012, 16, even through 2020 and beyond, really not easy in this space, because you're constantly barraged by the status quo. You're constantly told by family, friends, bosses, banks, governments, media, that you're wrong and this is the way because everybody else is doing it. Well, if everybody else is doing it, you better believe it, we're going to do the opposite, right? If what everybody else is doing is not working, we are definitely going to do the opposite. And that's really what's transpired with Bitcoin. Okay, so as I need to update this slide actually. Last 2 weeks ago, we went for another all-time high of over $124,000. Right? And obviously in Bitcoin, it goes up and down, up and down. I'll talk about why that happens in a minute. But the whole point is to know that we're now on the other side of this line. We've moved away now quite quickly from the old way, which was just a few of us in the world doing what we needed to do to make a difference. It's now become recognized by the biggest institutions, corporations, and governments on the planet. Now, I don't know how much more vindication you want than that. The next step is obviously to work to protect yourself from those very same people. They're going to put wind in the sails, no question, but they're also going to make it very difficult for you. So you've got to be on top of it. But it's no different than what it was back 10 years ago. You'll always get vested interest. That's the way life is. The whole point is to recognize it and be on your toes enough to understand how to operate as a sovereign individual as we get to the point, which we'll be looking forward to now over this next 5 years, of really driving forwards and having enough hard assets in cold storage and enough assets in our profit and loss account for us to be able to cash flow and protect ourselves at the same time. Yeah. And whether the CAGR stays at 68% or comes down to 30% or 27% as we project, it doesn't really matter, because it's all being built on a higher and higher and higher price discovery in dollar terms. And if a Bitcoin just appreciates at 40% CAGR because of devaluing fiat currency, and we're selling fiat and buying hard assets, we can't lose. That's the whole point, right? Just as many of us done with gold over the past few decades. So think about that and then understand how it all connects together. So it all connects in some very subtle but profound ways, which is why we talk about macroeconomics and we also talk about geopolitics. And they're both broadly interfaced. So, you can look at them under the same umbrella if you want. But there is subtle differences that you have to recognize. All right? So it's all about messaging. It's all about understanding subtlety and how that affects your business directly. Because if you own Bitcoin, for example, you are very, very close to the center of the money supply, because it's being influenced by all sorts of policy in monetary and fiscal terms. So we keep an eye on things, that's all. So we're proud to say and pleased to say that the biggest Bitcoin whale of all remains the people for now. The majority of Bitcoin supply, 16.9%, or just over 13.8 million Bitcoin, is still owned by the people, thankfully. Now that's us. You'll hear us talk a lot, especially in the Wealth Builder program, about why you need to have a proportion of your assets in cold storage. If you're not at that point yet and all your activities around making sure that your assets are at work, that's okay. That's okay. You need to do that to build critical mass. But there'll come a point where you need to segregate. You need to protect your balance sheet on cold storage and obviously maintain an allocation over in your P&L, right? Which is exactly what the big corporate treasuries and the ETF people are doing, right? And you'll find that the vast majority of people, I don't care how smart they think they are, or how long they've been in business, or how high up the political ladder they've got, you'll find the vast majority of people will find it much more convenient, just like they find it convenient to a pension plan, they'll find it much more convenient to pass their Bitcoin ownership, in this example, to the institutions through ETFs, for example. And that's exactly what's happening right in front of us. Now, what do? Do we fall for that? Nope. Do we have a foot in the game over there? Possibly. But we're more interested in maintaining self-sovereignty over our Bitcoin through our own seed words and letting all that activity benefit us directly to our Bitcoin. We're not interested in paying fees to 12 middlemen. We're only interested in making sure that we take control of our futures. So, it's almost like you can observe it, see it happening, not get too agitated about it, which we used to do back in the day when we had institutions and governments sniffing around the place. But now it's more of a resolution to say, well, it is what it is. And as long as we've got self-custody, we've got the best of both worlds, I suppose, is a way of saying it. All right. Now, a good example of that are these treasury companies. Structured strategy. So what's happening there? Well, it's moving very, very quickly. It's astonishing, actually, how many treasury companies, Bitcoin treasury companies, are now being created and developed. Be careful with them. The big elephant in the room is strategy. There's no question about that. But your meta planets and some of the smaller ones are worthy of contemplation as well. But the majority are going to be like the majority of shitcoins. Yeah. They're just using Bitcoin to create a treasury to rescue damaged or failing companies. And that's okay. That's business. No problem. Can't judge them. But it's not worth our funds, is it? It's not worth us getting involved. You want to be working with the best in class, which is the beauty of this industry right now, especially when you're front running it. In fact, we're so far ahead that many of us over the past few months, and it's only been months, have been acquiring strategy stock. We've certainly been dollar cost averaging Bitcoin for a long time. But the whole idea now is to take full advantage of both those activities because we expect strategy to be included in the S&P 500 this month. Now, we didn't see it coming that quickly. We expected them to go onto the S&P at some time, but the mood music out there is they're expecting strategy to enter the S&P 500 in September 2025. Now, if that happens, you'll see $20 to $30 billion of passive inflows from all sorts of portfolios rebalancing over on to strategy. It's into the Wall Street through the back door, if you will. So it's that prior slide I showed you where you've got the wind in the sails on steroids. Yeah? It's not only about anymore just awaiting for Bitcoin supply demand, which is fantastic in its own right. It's created 68% average CAGR over the past 14 years. We're not complaining. But now you've got huge movements of funds coming across, such as that 300 trillion in global bonds and 145 trillion in fixed income markets, which is the red here. That's the bond markets, and the green is the fixed income markets. This little slither here, this little tiny orange one, that's Bitcoin. And all that's going to happen is this will flip. It will flip. Now, it won't be tomorrow, might not be next year, might not be over the next decade, but it will flip. Because the whole thing now has been resequenced. It's basically a wealth transfer. Now, we've been talking about it for well over a decade, okay? But this financial repression, because a lot of companies now recognize that all they're doing is saving, devaluing fiat, and what they can be doing is placing profits and treasuries and their own balance sheets into accretive assets early, very early. And it's been spotted by the biggest in the world, which is Wall Street and other parts of the world, obviously, such as the City of London. Okay, so it's not a question of if these existing funds look for a new home. It's the question, where does it go? And it's pretty clear where it's headed now. Okay, and that's the benefit of where we sit in 2025. Yeah. Another way of looking at it is over the 40 years of delusion you've had here. So this is 1980. This is 2020. Yeah. So our grandparents, for example, yeah, maybe some of our parents were living through this constant uplift from after the war, this constant uplift in bond markets. Yeah. Remember, a lot of people's pensions are made up of bonds, 40% bonds, 60% stock, right? Just government selling currency, right? So the whole idea is this was great up until the 1980s. We wouldn't have recognized this, most of us, at the ages most of us are. But it's been in a falling all our lives, for most of us, much of our lives. Okay, so it is the case that market and bonds can lose money. Yeah, and now it's going back the other side again. It's looking for a new home. So again, it's just more evidence that there's liquidity, let's say, in simple terms, in the bigger markets than we've ever imagined. Certainly in terms of Bitcoin, we've always been working in relative isolation, but now it's becoming part of the fabric. That's the key. Okay, so these big macro stories, you do well to keep an eye on. We'll do our best, obviously, to see the headlines and just report them in a quick hour on a Monday. But you should become a student of this, I would suggest. And then you're much more on the front foot and in control. Last but not least, Tether to expand USD to support into Bitcoin, enabling native USD transfers into Bitcoin wallets. Now think about that. Think about that. As a company, I think we reported it a few months ago, USDT Tether is about the 7th largest company in the world as a buyer of US treasuries. 7th in the world, right? We now know what's going on, as reported last time, in regards to the standoff between stable coins, which is mainly now going to be US driven, and central bank digital currencies, which is European driven, right? As well as what's going on over in China. The whole idea is for us to be aware of both those sides and work with the central element, which is sound money. Yeah? Europe is still headless chickens, not really understanding what they're doing because they haven't got any gold to stand on. They gave it all away. And they've not yet realized what's going on. Or maybe they have. They're just being a little bit more, they're not stupid, are they? But at the end of the day, they're being very clandestine with regards to how they're communicating with their public, whereas the US are being much more open. But the US gives all the Europeans everything they need to know, right? Ironically. So even the policy of the UK and the policy of European politics is being changed by the American models now. And that's certainly going to be the case when it comes to, let's say, flexing of muscles in terms of which wins between stablecoins and central bank digital currencies. They're broadly the same thing, but the main message is it's about liquidity. Okay, liquidity. Enabling native USDT transfers to Bitcoin wallets. That's it, right? It's about movement across to sound money. What we've got to do is own as much sound money as we possibly can, ahead of now these accelerated curves, as we said here, right? This is why you've got this curve. This is why we're confident of these price discoveries on sound money, which is Bitcoin. That's the point. Your job is to leverage that continually, as we'll talk about in part 2. Now, the other thing going on is the shenanigans around the sentiment. So these men here, we've been tracking for a long time. Yeah, and people before them. We were tracking people way before these people. But certainly just over the past decade, since 2020, since 2015, you'll see their sentiment before 2024 and now what they're all of a sudden saying. Right? The reality is either these individual people didn't work hard enough to understand even sound money, let alone Bitcoin, or they just went with vested interest. And some of them, it was definitely vested interest, right? So you're working with old-fashioned economics, with Jerome Powell and Jamie Dimon. Other guys come purely out of finance, made huge amounts of money and success, no problem. Larry Fink, Mark Cuban, been very successful in business. Donald Trump, property, obviously, now straddling politics. And then Mike Saylor with his financial engineering. Yeah, but it speaks for itself, right? Now, I say to people more and more, and people do approach me and say, oh, Sean, why are you so convinced that this is working? Why are you so passionate about what it is that you do in your academy business? Well, first of all, because we've been working this longer than these guys since before 2014, and we're not complaining in terms of what we've been able to achieve. And secondly, look, friend, family member, are you seriously trying to compete with some of the most successful and powerful minds, whatever you think of them, in the world, who are you? Right? So you just end up slipstreaming. And the beauty of the communications age, the internet age, especially, I would suggest, through platforms like X, you can be in communication with these people 2 or 3 removed. You can even be on spaces with them in real time, every day if you want. And that is a much better use of energy and time, in my estimations, than sat in traffic on a commute waiting for a boss to tell you what to do or listening to your brother-in-law. And the fact that a lot of these guys have shifted as fast as they have shifted, to be fair to Saylor, he started in 2020, just tells you all you need to know. All it takes is the desire to look at the fundamental issues of 20th century currencies and get educated on 21st century financial technology. That's all it takes. Who can be bothered? Not to work hard and take just a little time to see what these successful men now see is to persist in ignorant bliss. Maybe that's what your friends and family want. Maybe they want you to persist in ignorant bliss because it's easier for them. Maybe. Does it really matter? No. The whole point is to take the narrative and obviously not say everything's going to be sweetness and light and we're so right, everything's perfect, told you so. No, not at all. We're not really concerned about other people. What we're concerned about is changing the system enough so it affects enough people naturally. You don't need to go through what we go through or you've gone through to get to where you are today. On the business side, it's just going to be net beneficiary because of the nature of what it should be in what's called sound money, wealth redistribution, and properly designated inflation, let's call it. You're always going to have inflation, but it doesn't have to be so clandestine, which is what we have with fiat currency and derivatives. You see? So this is happening, and we all have to make our minds up around Donald Trump and Larry Fink and even people like Jamie Dimon. Jerome Powell's finished now anyway, but Mark Saylor seems to be leading the charge, right? So I guess we'll find out. Point is, are you better to have a position in it than not? You decide. So politically, it gets even more interesting politically because everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's an expert. Everybody sits back on their armchair and shouts at the TV that everything's wrong, the politicians are stupid, etc. But they don't bother to stand up for office. They don't bother to become an MP. Right? That's the average person in the world, of course. Most people don't even vote and they still complain. The whole idea is if you're that bothered, go and make a difference. How can you make a difference? Well, you could go and be a politician if you want. You could become a high flyer in business. Absolutely. Go for it. Or you could just become part of a mass balance sheet, all designed, as Bitcoin has proven, to be influenced by millions of people's behaviors. The political side of it means it becomes more diluted in terms of human behavior. But as I said on the prior slide, fortunately, 68% of Bitcoin is still owned by the people. Will that be the case forever? Nope. Why? Because people do what people do, right? They haven't got the patience, persistence, fortitude, resilience, and that's okay. If you bought Bitcoin for $100 and you bought 100 Bitcoin 10 years ago, would you necessarily be hanging on to it right now? That's okay. So there will be a shift. But in that shift, especially if you're going through these next 5 years and you're not quite at the point where you've got that ability to say, my balance sheet is locked down, I can see that, I'm going to hold that in cold storage, and I'm going to put another dose across onto operations. If you're not at that point where you've got cash flow and security of purchasing power, then you are going to have to go through this. But we've been through it already. Right? We've been through it already. Many times. We're okay to do it again. And we're certainly okay to help as many people as possible, which is what the Wealth Builder series is there for. So, again, gets a little bit more opaque because politics is opaque. But you've got things like the Fed Reserve Supervision Chief talking about how Bitcoin will play a role in the future financial system. Okay. Yeah. You see how you know what was going on with the Fed interest rates and all the show, the entertainment, the circus. Yeah. We get it. Go and look at what's going on underneath. That's why the platforms we have to our fingertips these days are so powerful. That's why we can summarize them to the best of our ability on calls like this. China considers yuan-backed stable coins. Okay, so it's watching, it's observing. As I've said many times, China has the ability to move quicker because it doesn't have to go through layers and layers and layers of government decision-making. To be fair, the US have moved incredibly quickly just in the past 8-9 months. The Europeans don't know what they're doing. And even if they did, they can't move quickly because they're totally quagmired in administration. They're even worse than the US. But China will move quickly, okay? And they don't mess about, whether we agree with them or not. Trouble is, it goes both ways, right? They've banned Bitcoin again, for example. Again, it will be unbanned again by Christmas. So people don't know where they stand, and obviously there's a difference there, but that's okay. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Bitcoin reserves have confirmed the US Bitcoin reserves are worth in the region of 15 to 20 billion. Okay, now that's still open to discussion, right? We're still not getting what we need. Do we need it? No, but you know what I mean. It'd be nice to have some level of transparency. Although last week we did pick up that for the first time in the world, the US government is about to start to apply their financial affairs on the blockchain. So we'll see. If they can provide proof of reserves on the blockchain for everybody, especially US citizens, to see, then we'll start to believe them, won't we? And things may just start to level out a little bit. But I guess we'll find out. Doesn't really matter at the moment. It's all about sentiment. And if the Treasury of the USA is confirming reserves at a Bitcoin level, that's good enough for us right now. Vietnamese government to launch its first Bitcoin and crypto exchanges. That's the government. Think about that. And if you're tracking what's going on with RVs and other such things, you saw last week they got rid of sitting administrators, okay? Some people in the community are very close to the RVs, so make of it what you will. There's a lot of crackpots out there, but in terms of where we're headed over at Vietnamese government level, I think it's becoming clearer, so I guess we'll find out. SEC wants to open crypto to retail more and more. Relatively old news now with Hester Pierce, seemingly a lady that knows what she's doing. We're looking for ways for retail to get earlier access to growth. Okay, if you want to solve individual despondency and desperation, if for many people, then empower them. And obviously it starts with education. All right. So they're looking for one of these first stages. This new executive order that was signed a few weeks ago pushes the SEC and Department of Labour to open retirement accounts to private assets, including crypto. If you listen to last week, there was a 3-hour meeting that the US, the main people who sit around the table, in the US government, I forget the term they use for it. 3 hours they sat down, right, for the media. You know what they're like. They'll talk and talk and talk all day long, right? But there was some very interesting stuff came out of that meeting, including the blockchain financial statement and more detail with regards to opening retirement accounts up so that they can access assets such as sound money, Bitcoin. That's what I mean by giving the people stuff when they don't really understand it or know it. Yeah. So if the financial institutions are moving in that direction, that'll be for self-interest. You can guarantee that. But if the governments are starting to open up the big retirement plans to this type of technology, it's got to be seen as a positive step, at least in the near term. Central Asia's first Bitcoin ETF just launched in Kazakhstan. Okay, that's very important. Okay, so there is that standoff. Okay, there is that area between Russia and Europe. And the whole idea is, don't be drawing on the screen, please. The whole idea is to make sure that we're aware of these wider groups. Okay, groups of influence, I suppose you could call it, coming from the States, and in my opinion, coming across from the BRICS, mainly through just stop touching the screen, look, mainly through the idea that we're seeing these two spheres of influence, East and West, basically, but it'll meet in the middle somewhere, right? So we watch what's going on in Eastern Europe with interest. The world's first largest sovereign wealth fund, which is Norway. We've discussed this before. Norway did a great job of managing North Sea oil as compared to the British, who completely squandered it. They've done a great job and continue to do a great job by now directly holding 7,161 Bitcoin on their sovereign wealth fund. Amazing job. Okay, hats off to the Norwegians. Obviously, they're getting sort of embroiled inside this military complex as well, unfortunately, but that's migrated now to Europe, as we know. So it is what it is. We can't really fight that. But huge taxation dollars get sucked up into that military complex, let's say, especially now Trump's done one over on NATO and the Europeans. So Norway is involved with that, but at least they're funding it through a sovereign wealth fund, or can do if they wish, right? So very, very smart. Hats off to them. So we've had some pearl clutching going on with the strategy community. This is going back into Mike Saylor. The whole idea is that these people moan and groan no matter what goes on. We get a lot of people like that in DBM, by the way, a lot of pearl clutches. Right? The whole idea is to work together to push through. If you start going off in segments everywhere, then it's going to hide into nothing. The whole point is to make sure you're working towards a joint benefit, and that's what's happened. The lawsuit got dropped last week, so they're now into standard Bitcoin accounting again, which is good news for everybody. And last but not least, Trump's company, again, whatever you make of this is your own decisions, but at the end of the day, the sentiment is all we want with regards to putting wind in the sails for the assets we own directly, which in this case is Bitcoin, and obviously now that they've confirmed, this Trump organization have confirmed that Bitcoin is on their balance sheet, you just get more and more momentum. Okay, so it's sort of a political stroke macro point that, but you see where I'm coming from. So to wrap up then, remember, a lot of information there. Okay, this goes out onto the open channels, YouTube, etc. Drop a like, drop a bell, by the way, if you're over on YouTube. Good to see you. And to break this information down into steps, which is absolutely critical, there's no other way of doing it, you need to make sure that you are well looked after. Okay, so with decades and decades of real experience in the blockchain and digital space, the coaches are here waiting. And as I say, for $25 a month now, you can get access from this month into the Wealth Builder series, which will take you through 12 modules over the course of a year in how to go from an absolute newbie all the way through to asset wealth manager expert. That's the idea of it. So hopefully that's useful. Any questions, pop them in the links below, put them in the comments below. You'll see the links below for more access to more of this information I've given today. Hope you're all well. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.